First of all, I want to thank all the people from the Symposium for putting this on, and it's something of a reunion for Barbara and I, because we met Camilla and Lisa and Gidsken and Mark and all the folks from Moscow in Moscow last October at a really, really interesting media impact conference. So it's just wonderful to see everybody again and to be here. And I was going to be a little bit sarcastic and say that it's also wonderful to be here among Norwegian insurgents and would-be rebels living here in the heart of the American neo-colony of Norway. But I won't go into that. But I do come from America, from New York specifically, and I've come from a year of listening to the most putrid propaganda promoted by the media about the elections. I won't even mention the name of the people that are running, but and way too many conversations among my progressive and left friends about the necessity to choose between the lesser of two evils. And I think that that has, to some degree, exposed the problem that we face as progressives wanting to change the world. And for years, Deep Dish TV has been trying to deepen our understanding of what it is we're up against, and at the same time give voice to ordinary people who are, in fact, the agents of change. So when I go ugh to people telling me about choosing the lesser of two evils, the response is, well, what's your plan? And my response to that is, that's exactly what we should be talking about. What is the plan? Rather than trying to decide who would we rather have as the Roman emperor, Nero or Caligula. The problem is the empire. And that's what we're not addressing in a serious enough and analytical enough way. And I'm also very grateful to Eric for how this symposium opened, because the very act of calling for the blessing and recognizing the earth and the sky in the Middle Earth where we live raises many contradictions. It raises the contradiction of, and we talked a bit about this last night, are we appropriating the rituals of a people who are being extincted by the onslaught of the modern world or by the modern imperial world? But if you look at Standing Rock in the United States right now, you see the force that is mobilizing hundreds of thousands of people in America that's coming from these deep ancient traditions of respect for the planet that we live on. And so I think that this was, in a very contradictory way in many senses, was put before us through the blessing. I'm very grateful for, and it gives me many things to think about. So I'm going to sort of use notes, which I normally don't do because I want to stay within the 20 minutes. But the other thing is I not only come from America, but in the last week, well, actually the last 2 weeks, I come from Tempelhof Airport in Berlin, where 1,000 Syrian refugees are still housed in, from what I could see, sanitary but pretty horrible conditions. I come from Nuremberg, where we went into the courtroom where the Nuremberg trials were held, and I have an image. Is that image up there? No, not that one. Maybe I didn't put it up. All right. Anyway, I'll speak about it. In the courtroom where the Nuremberg trials were held, when we sat down to get a little lecture on the history of that room, we were staring at a giant crucifix of Jesus on the wall. And I finally had to ask the question, what is that crucifix doing there? Is this to rub it into the Jews that they lost? Or is it to tell defendants who come before the bar in this courtroom that you're screwed, you're crucified? What is the message that comes from this? And so, again, I was being a little sarcastic, but the question is, why don't we ever dig into the, and this was true throughout our trip through Europe in the last several weeks. The history that's told of the Second World War and the origins of the belief systems that the Nazis propagated, in my view, is incredibly superficial, right? When have we ever examined the role of the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church in promoting anti-Semitism going back to the 10th century and before? You know, where was the first law that Jews and Muslims had to wear special clothing? They had to wear special hats. They had to wear a yellow badge. That came from the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, where thousands of bishops of the Catholic Church decreed that Jews had to be separated. So this anti-Semitism runs through the history of Europe and all of its most fundamental cultural institutions. And so my question is, why? Why don't we ever talk about these things? So, and that's kind of the topic of my thinking today, is the why question. And I would just follow that up because we saw last night the National Theater apology, and I saw it again today at the National Theater. You know, why is it that a people were almost exterminated in Europe can turn around and, through their leaders, not through all their people, but through their leaders, treat another people almost as horribly as they were treated? And I'm talking about the Israelis and the Palestinians. That's a question. Why aren't we exploring those questions? And I think it's, did I turn it off? Yeah, okay. Why aren't we exploring those questions? And I think it's not just the techniques we use as media people, it's the questions that we ask and where we lead people, or the questions we raise to lead people to a deeper understanding of the world that we live in. So anyway, when we were in Prague, we went to the Theresienstadt concentration camp, and I picked up this book, which was very moving to me. It's called Art Against Death, and it's the paintings and the music and the writings of the men and women who were in Theresienstadt, most of whom ended up in the gas chambers. But the introduction to that book has a quote that I think is pretty significant, for me anyway. And it says that the Theresian painters are primarily those who had the courage to go beyond the Nazi image of a model ghetto and rise up against its dictates in favor of truth and creative freedom. And that led me to think about some words that I've always pondered from Bertolt Brecht, who said that art is not a mirror held up to reality, but a hammer with which to shape it. And he didn't say a hammer with which to smash it. He said a hammer with which to shape it. So, having said that, I just want to quickly address a question that the first Supper Symposium asked is, how do activists, here's the way the question was put, how does activist art obtain political impact when playing by the rules of the media? And the second part, that what we wanted to do in this symposium was unfolding the means by which art activism may become an agent for change in a world of political and economic crisis. So my first answer to that is we don't want to play by the rules of the corporate media or the state media, or as we have in the United States, the public media. We don't want to play by those rules. I think the rules that we want to play by could be summarized as dig deep, tell the truth, respect your intended audience, and become skilled in your creative medium. And that's part of respecting the audience that you are attempting to communicate with, is becoming skilled in your art. Did it go off again? No, it is. So I just wanted to raise another question. We talked about in the symposium invitation, it talked about activist art. And that raised for me the question, well, what is activist art? And is that any different from art? And so I put up a bunch of images. The first is Goya, men fighting with cudgels. You can just run through those. Second one is Goya's The Inquisition. The third is Botero's, from Botero's series of paintings about Abu Ghraib. And of course, this is Munch's In Man's Brain, and which I saw recently, and really for the first time I thought was very interesting. But my question was, is that art or is that political art? Because each one of those images communicates something very relevant to the human condition and the human interaction. So that's just a question I'll leave on the table. So what are the rules of the media that we may want to follow or reject? And I would sum up the rules of the corporate media and the government/public media this way. Say nothing that challenges the worldview of the empire and its elites. 2, do not ask questions that might raise questions. 3, reduce everything to the most simplistic explanation. 4, avoid providing context. 5, people should be portrayed only as passive observers of reality, victims, stupidly culpable, or actively supporting reaction. 6, tell a good story. Most importantly, tell a good visual story. 7, repeat it. Tell it over and over in as many ways as possible. Repeat the iconic images of that story over and over again. And at the earlier symposium at the National Theater today, we heard some examples from documentary filmmakers about how stories are told over and over again from the elite and from the imperial point of view that very quickly become part of our collective consciousness. And so the job, it seems to me, of independent media makers today is not only not to play by the same rules that the corporate media forces people to do, but to find alternative pathways. That doesn't mean that we don't use the internet or that we don't use television or that we never put anything on a DVD. But if we fight with their tools, we're going to end up just like them. We have to devise our own tools, and there's a wonderful book by Tracy Kidder called The Soul of the Machine. And I think it's at least something worth thinking about, is that these tools that we as a human species use, some of them are fantastic, but they get appropriated and used in really destructive ways. So anyway, I just want to go through a few of the things that Deep Dish TV has tried to do. First of all, this is our 30th anniversary. And we're having a celebration in New York on December 2nd. But the title of it is Celebrate Independent Media in honor of Deep Dish TV at 30. And there are a number of other organizations in the U.S., 2 of them in particular that I'll single out, that are celebrating their 20th anniversaries. The first is Democracy Now!, which some of you may have seen on the internet with Amy Goodman, which Deep Dish TV put on television. Amy had a radio show, and at the 2000 Democratic and Republican conventions, we said to her, hey, let's do this as a TV thing. And in the first years of Democracy Now!, we would tape the programs. Those are the VHS days. And we would send the VHS tapes around to about 400 public access channels around the country. I won't go into what public access is in America. You may or may not know. But anyway, that's how Democracy Now! Began to develop its audience. And now, of course, things go up on satellite, primarily through Free Speech TV, which is a independent, progressive satellite channel, and also on Link TV. So the other organization that's celebrating its 20th anniversary is Alternative Radio, which has become quite successful. It's on about 130 radio stations around the country on a monthly or weekly basis. Basically interviewing left-wing intellectuals who have something to say. And who would have thought that they could be self-sustaining for 20 years in interviewing, left-wing intellectuals. But anyway, David Barsamian, Amy Goodman, Juan Gonzalez, and all of their staffs, I think, have done a remarkable job of not capitulating to the rules of the media, but using the platforms that we at the moment have access to and using them to inform and to help people discuss and develop consciousness. So I want to point to a couple of things that we did. I'm going to use, for example, a series that we did back in 2004, 2005, which was such a long time ago, on the Iraq War. Yes, the same Iraq War that's going on today. And the series was called Shocking and Awful. So, Gidsken, can you play the first clip?
Standing up for what's right. For the living we will fight. For the living we will fight. Am I right or right? Am I right or right?
I think, rather I know, and I think most Americans know, but we just can't come to terms with coming to the reality that the reason that we're there for is for our own self-interest.
Iraq was a profitable way to, for our government to kind of, stabilize the oil markets and also just have a presence there. I think that's really what we're trying to do.
Well, they said they invaded Iraq for all the stuff that they had, and they didn't have anything. So it was all a lie, big lie.
Well, I think the United States is in there mostly for oil. We're just trying to use Iraq as a way to control the Middle East, control our interests in the Middle East. And, it's obvious that the Bush agenda since the beginning has been to go into Iraq, and they just use September 11th as an excuse.
All they care about is oil and all of the stuff that doesn't even deal with this so-called democracy that exists today.
The weapons manufacturers making the money that is spent on the war in Iraq, as well as Bush getting his oil, and I think it's about imperialism and about Bush's money.
Saddam Hussein, the president of Iraq, or Afghanistan, I think, he bombed the World Trade Center with the planes.
We heard it a lot of times.
So I use that clip for a couple of reasons. For three reasons, really. You see how artists have entered into protests, activist protests. The guy with the flag there was from Bread and Puppet Theater in upstate New York. And there was an incident in one of these anti-war demonstrations where the police actually, this was in Philadelphia, where the police actually arrested the puppets and locked them up in a warehouse so that nobody could get at them, right? And so people had to go bail the puppets out, right? But, these visual images have been increasingly effective and have an impact, And then the final thing that I think is very important about this is what that young kid said at the end, right? And it goes back to my points about how the media, the rules of the corporate media. He was the oldest of three sons of an Arab family, the mom was wearing the hijab. They were pushing another little kid in the stroller. They had an anti-war demonstration. When I asked him, why is the U.S. invading Iraq, he said, it's because Saddam Hussein bombed the World Trade Center, right? Now, clearly, this is not what his parents were saying, but it's coming at him from every media outlet. And so the question that we confront, I think, as media makers is, how do we counteract that? They have immense power, and I would argue that everything we're talking about is really a question of power. What kind of power can counteract their power? And I'll go back to the statement I made earlier that if we use their means and try to use their kind of power, we're going to end up like they do, or like we are. So it's a big question for media people. So what we've tried to do is not only show the resistance and the creativity of people, but we've also tried to show the deeper causes that are not obvious. In other words, when we talk about the Iraq War and ask the question why, on one level, oil is an answer. But so we did another little clip that you can play now.
Yeah. What is it good for?
The war on terrorism is very convenient for making the rest of the world secure for capitalism.
Yeah. What is it good for?
It's a joke. There's a war on terrorism. They go to Henry Kissinger's hotel right now and place him under arrest.
Yeah. What is it good for?
I think the war on terrorism is an official paranoid push against local economies, local democracies, and I think the transnational corporate people like it.
So part of this that, you know, consciously we've tried to do is make visible the invisible, right? The hundreds of thousands, literally the millions of people. You know, one of the largest, I think it was the February 2003 anti-war protest that was in the United States and in Europe. There was an estimate of 16 million people turned out on the streets the same day to oppose the war in Iraq. But that was not seen in the corporate media or the state media. And so I think that's another job of the independent, or I would call us, let's face it, the radical change-making media, is to really make visible the fact that people are not just buying into what we're being told, and we're not just buying into these wars. Now, I also think that it's really important to emphasize the role of artists in the movement for social change. And in every one of the series that we do, and we've done, I think, 500 hours of television over the last 30 years, and now the internet, we've tried to highlight the important role that artists play. So there's a clip on there that says Mary Frank, I believe. Mary Frank, the artist that you'll see, is the wife of the photographer Robert Frank, who some of you may know about. Okay, go ahead.
I know the painting well since I was really very young when it was at the Modern, and I always really loved it and was very fascinated by it. And because I thought I knew it so well, if I wanted to copy a piece, I thought, well, this will go quick. But it was very complicated and very, very amazing how the parts locked together, the lines of tears, and just everything about it is unfathomable, actually. I mean, And then I had done these women with the dead children, the women in black. Part of what I found really wonderful about the demonstration was that so many people who are not artists and who don't make things in their sort of daily life, obviously thousands and thousands of them took a piece of cardboard off a box. There were so many wonderful signs of every kind, words, images. Some were funny, some were very cynical, but they were really full of life and they were a real outpouring.
Okay, I just got the signal. So, and I promised I would stick to the thing. There's a number of more clips that I was going to show you, but you're sort of welcome. I would encourage you to go to www.deepdishtv.org and see the work that we've done over the years. So thank you.